Good morning. My name is Sue, and I've always been fascinated by the story of the Titanic, especially when I found out that my great-great-grandfather had been very good friends with the founders of the Macy's department store, two people that had drowned on the Titanic. Story going that she had given up her seat in the lifeboat to stay with her husband. They were the Strausses, originally from Columbus, Georgia, where my great-great-grandfather had founded the Chase Conservatory of Music. This is the story of people and what had happened once the Titanic sank. Some people did not have the best of luck. Some people had misadventures, but these stories will cover what happened to these people then. One has to start with the premise that at the time, air travel between the United States and Europe was not done yet and was not in the foreseeable future. Money was in the maritime, and there was a lot of competition. In fact, there was a German company in the middle of building a ship that was going to make the Titanic look like a steamboat. It was just 100 yards longer. It was going to be big. So they were under a lot of pressure to make a good ship. My first story is going to be on the two waifs that were left by their father, who had left in a desperate attempt to leave for the United States while taking his two children. On May 8th, Mrs. Narvati, the mother of two children rescued from the Titanic, who are in the charge of Mrs. Hayes of New York, has recognized her boys in the pictures on the American newspapers, and she is sailing to New York to pick them up and claim her children. She did go on to do that. That is my first story. My second story concerns John Jacob Astor. Now, he was the wealthiest man on the ship to die, and it was noted in the year 2013, the income from the estate of John Jacob Astor since the death of Mr. Astor from the Titanic just 2 years ago was more than $24,974,000, according to a report of his investors filed with the Surrogate in New York last week. This distributions have been amounted to more than $24,715,000, leaving a balance of not quite $78,000. Now, you understand that under these, the way it is today, that would be Elon Musk dying and leaving his money, and probably even more money than he has. Mrs. Astor went on to have her baby boy in August, and she kept in touch with friends who on the Titanic had survived with her, writing letters when they also had children. Now, on the monetary side of it, the Titanic survivors sued. Mrs. Farthrop wants $10,000 for the loss of her husband from the White Star Company. August 28th, Mrs. Elizabeth Fosthorpe, widow of Titanic victim and herself a survivor, has sent the White Star Company for $10,000 to the federal court here for the loss of her husband. His body was recovered at sea, and more than $1,000 worth of jewelry was taken from his clothing. The widow was not allowed to have this until she proved that she was the minister of the estate. So the money started going. People wanted money. Now goes the stories where you can wonder, kind of laugh at this, but Mayor Trumbull of Canton was talking about a statement made by a Titanic officer that had been a terrible black eye for the Titanic administration. This statement, he says, is a reminder of a little Canton boy. Tommy, why are you so unkind to your Nana? Why don't you love her? His mother once asked him. Because I don't, the infant terrible replied. I just hate her. I could pinch her cheek like Papa does. Haha. Now we have a story of a Titanic survivor who was accused. John Gorman, a survivor of the Titanic, is wanted by the police on charge of having forged his name to a local firm to a check of $90. He draws a pension of 64 cents a day from the White Star Line. Gorman helped man lifeboat number 3 and suffered some exposure as to impair his heart. He is employed by a real estate firm here and bore a good reputation. It was because of his not asking a cash consideration for the loss of his personal effects that he got a pension from the steamship line. So his problems were just starting. And then you get the news that and the little innuendos. This is dated April 26, 1912. And it's got a big picture of John Jacob Astor on the front page of the paper with Bruce Ismay, and it says, "Look out asleep and crew all drunk on ill-fated Titanic." This is the Peterson Evening News, and it's the headline. The next This one is headlined, "Another Tragedy of the Titanic. Frenchman kills second wife and self when he learns that his first wife still lives." Paris, June 1st. Among the passengers of the Titanic whose names were given among those that had died was Madame Creamy, a native of Bethlehem. Her husband lamented her loss for a reasonable time and then married another woman. On Tuesday, Beanie received a letter from his first wife stating that she was very much alive and that was on her way back to Bethlehem. The husband became very much excited and tired and put 4 bullets in his second wife's head, killing her. They then committed suicide rather than meet with his first wife, who had been rescued from the Titanic. Now that's a sad story. This letter was written in an open letter to a Titanic survivor, Mrs. Dale. In order to settle the dispute, will you kindly inform me in your immediate of Saturday of the week whether or not it was the steamship of the Olympia or the Titanic that warped the steamship New York out of the docks in Liverpool, owing to the great dart of the water drawn by either of them. These steamers are the steamships from their dock. If you will answer this for me, I will be able to settle an argument that has been written on the subject and oblige. And then there's an answer. It was the ill-fated Titanic that caused the condition you described as she was leaving Liverpool on her maiden voyage, and has since proved that it was her last and only voyage. Now, I'm sorry, but the English is very bad, and I had trouble reading it. My next story is some souvenirs of the Titanic. Erie agent P.F. Van Noy, while traveling on the train 7 last Thursday, received from Mosers, Victor Sunderland of Cleveland, Ohio, and Edwin Dankins of Ogilvie, Illinois, 2 English passengers en route to the west, a coin purse carried by Mr. Sunderland, was a passenger on the ill-fated Titanic. Both men were on the main deck of the steamship and managed to get onto an overturned boat and was rescued by the Carpathia. My next story is men thought the Titanic wouldn't sink, and says he was saved by a bureau drawer. This is May 1st. George Harris, 35, an Englishman and survivor of the Titanic, who had been working as a gardener in the Herman Place, had been sent back to New York for a nervous wreck. The Titanic Relief Committee is expected to look after him. He arrived here a week ago, Tuesday, after reaching New York on the Carpathia. He has listed his name with a garden and store and being a gardener of ability. Harris was traveling as second-class passenger and says he got away from the ship just before the boilers burst. Before that time, there had been a rush of second-class passengers to first-class quarters, but they were met by a line of the crew armed with revolvers held back until the women and children had been permitted to pass. Harris says that shortly after that, he jumped into the water and he saw a man holding onto a drawer of a bureau. Harris was a professional swimmer in his youth and kept afloat until the man on the bureau drawer became exhausted and let go a hold and sank. So he watched him drown. Harris then claims to have been in the water for 4 hours being picked up by the boat. He then became unconscious and remained so for 48 hours, regaining his senses on the Carpathia. He lost $2,000 in savings of his life, and he told such a rambling story that he might easily have been mistaken for a faker. But Mr. Goodfellow, under whom he was employed, found that the story was genuine. He was saved by the men left on the Titanic in Combine, and the last moment he would use his abilities as a swimmer to hold on to that bureau drawer. One cannot tell a story of the Titanic without mentioning the brave members of the band who knew that their time was very limited and that they would soon be facing their own demise, and yet they bravely kept on playing to calm down the passengers.